The trading environment for people who work in banks, the work environment in general in investment banks, is a challenging one. A lot of banks are built upon this idea that competition and conflict is what brings the best out of people. So it can be quite a difficult environment to work in. As well as that, there's this fundamental conflict that is embedded at the core of the finance system, which is that risk takers are the innovators. They're the people who are looking to generate profits by finding solutions and understanding problems and trading and taking risk, etc. They're expected to do it within the rules, but they're expected to push against those boundaries of the rules. And often in financial services, but also in professional services, a lot of the work is about finding ways to not break the law, but to be able to effectively arbitrage the rules in order to generate the best return or minimize costs, etc. And against that, you have a group of people who are effectively in compliance and risk control and operational functions, and their job is to stop the risk takers from taking too much risk or going across those lines too far. But of course, what that creates is sort of this tension, this conflict within the institutions. That can make life actually really challenging because, of course, if you have embedded conflict, the problem is that people struggle to trust each other and to build relationships with each other. So when they come into trouble or they find a problem they can't resolve, rather than be able to trust that someone else can help them to resolve it, they lack that sort of human connection that we need, those relationships that we need to be able to resolve problems. It can make the working environment really tough, especially at times of great stress. The typical working day in a bank, on a trading floor especially, starts around 6 a.m. in the morning, 6:30 a.m. in the morning. My working day, let's say it started at 6:30, you'd be at the desk at 6:30. You would sort of do a lot of reading, trying to understand what was likely to be happening in the markets that day. You would manage the risk on your book, run your profit and loss accounts, etc. And then the market opens at 8 o'clock. Well, 7 o'clock for the futures, 8 o'clock for the real markets. And then from then until about 4:30, it's pretty much just trading, speaking to your clients, communicating with other people on the trading floor, trying to understand events as they're happening in real time. In our case, we had a very big book with a lot of global stocks on it. So sometimes you had to stay at the desk until the US market closed, or you would send an order to Asia to be executed in Asian hours, and therefore you'd have to monitor the Asian markets as well during their opening hours. So there were times when it was really stressful, really busy, where we were easily working, either at the desk or from home, up to 20 hours a day. It's a pretty challenging environment. So if the European market closes at 4:30, I might leave the desk at 6:30 or 7, or I might stay until 9 o'clock to see how the US closes, go home, probably fall asleep, wake up around 12:30, see what's happening in Asia, go back to sleep, wake up again at 3, see what's going on in China, go back to sleep, and then you would wake up for the last time around 4:30 or 5, and that would be getting ready for work. So you can see that in that sequence of events, you've basically had broken sleep for about 3 or 4 hours in the day, and you basically keep that going for as long as you can. That was specific to our desk because of the lack of resources on the desk, the size of the book, the complexity of it all. Other desks are much more simple. You might be in charge of an autos book. So your basket of stocks that you manage are a certain sector. And in which case, you're trading the European markets, you kind of work from 6 till 5. But nowadays, the work is changing even more. So a lot of it is about, quantitative analysis and programming and coding automation into the trading systems. So, we've lost a lot of the human beings in the trading environment, and they've been replaced by machines, AI, machine learning, etc. So it's about guys and girls sitting there coding basically ways in which, or different algorithms to trade the markets instead of human beings. I think it's got pluses and negatives, but I think that automation is an interesting phenomenon. You know, the automating out of human intervention is not necessarily a good thing. In our world, I think the most valuable thing that we have is our shared human values, and the relationships between us is actually what keeps us safe. If you see around the world today, increasing nationalism and populism is dividing people, and you know, people are saying, you know, this is my team and that's your team, and you know, we've got to get ours and you can do what you need to get yours, but we're in competition against each other. That's not a positive thing, but that's being baked in to the automation. So we're allowing the machines to kind of learn how to do stuff themselves, but that means that we no longer understand what they do. And I think we are embedding risks into our markets that we just don't understand right now. We've seen some examples of what can happen when the machines go wrong. You know, if you look at the flash crash in May of 2010, if you look at the flash crash even in August of 2015, and recently we've had problems in, you know, the dollar sterling currency markets, etc., where the machines just sometimes don't work. And I think the combination of massive leverage, huge growth in debt, and automation actually, I think, means that when we get to the next downturn in the cycle, we will, you know, there's a risk that we'll see some really weird moves in the markets that we won't understand, and that could lead to a breakdown. When you don't understand what the machine is doing, what we do is we turn the machine off. But then there's no human beings to step in because we've just let the machines learn how to do it. You know, what's likely to happen is, and it's happened a few times already, where in the old days, if the market went into a spiral, a senior person with a lot of experience who's seen it before will step in and go, I'm just gonna take the risk, and I'm going to act as the market maker of last resort. And with the backing of whatever reserves that institution has, and the credibility that that person has built over time, that's a safety net. But with the machines, when that happens, because we just don't understand, you have to switch it off, which means there's no one there to sort of be the last resort. And I think that that's something we haven't quite understood yet. You know, we've put circuit breakers into the markets to create pauses, enforced pauses when the market moves too much. But I'm not entirely convinced that that's enough. You know, over the last 15 years, I would say, we've started to recognize the importance of diversity in our workplaces. The problem is that, you know, the first challenge is to increase the diversity of your recruiting, because you need to get people who come from different backgrounds to bring different modes of thinking. So actually what we're looking for is diversity of thought, because that diversity leads to richness in your problem solving. But of course, the problem, there's a chicken and egg situation where you find more diverse people. If there's not enough of them, then the cult of culture, ultimately, within the institution, ends up, people need to alter their behavior to match the institution. And we see that everywhere. It's not just in banking. And it's a problem, because actually, we need to maintain the diversity of the people we get in and recruit more diverse people. But what's happening is that in really stressed environments, where there is too much competition, people end up conforming because that's how they progress. And so you lose the value of that diversity. What everyone needs to remember is that bankers are just like everyone else. They are your brothers and sisters, you know, they're your daughters and sons, they're your fathers and mothers. Literally, They are just like the rest of us. But when they enter the environment, because of the challenges in the environment, because of the extreme competition, because of the conflict that's embedded at its root, people start to change. Because otherwise, your choice is, either I align with the culture, my behavior needs to be of such that I achieve what the institution is asking me to do, or I leave. But the ability to see clearly enough to leave the environment is very rare. Very few people have the bandwidth that's required to both be in the environment and operate successfully and still be able to pay heed to the voice in the back of their mind that says, actually, this environment is damaging you or is damaging society. And it goes back to what Margaret Heffernan says and what Dr. Mariam Kuchaki says, which is that if you lose authenticity, if you're under too much pressure and you become resource depleted, you're unable to make morally sound decisions. So you're unable to go, this environment is damaging me. It's really interesting because I still have a lot of friends in the industry, and one by one, they're starting to leave because they're kind of going, well, I can stay here and earn enough money to live my life, but in doing so, I'm becoming inauthentic. My personal values and the institutional values don't align, and that's making me unhappy, actually. And what we need to do is understand that that's fundamentally because of the structure of the industry, the conflict that's embedded in it, but also because a lot of the activity in the industry is not necessarily purposeful. It doesn't meet the social contract that we need to advance between institutions and societies. Actually, what a lot of the activity is for is simply what I was saying before, which is to extract as much value and profit as possible, or to ensure or to reduce how much some people contribute to society through taxes, etc. And for that reason, because all humans are part of a global society, what happens when people have clarity is they go, hang on, if I was outside this bank as a member of society, would I think that this activity is fair? And it leads to a lot of disenfranchisement. You're seeing a lot of movements like Escape the City, for example, which is built to help young people follow their dream, rather than working for a big institution, professional services or finance. People are being increasingly encouraged to go after something that meets the social contract, that's purposeful in one way or another. And in a way, our institutions need to understand the role they play and take that back, that responsibility back, and say, actually, we need to get our people to understand that we want them to do stuff that's purposeful, that actually resolves some of the big global issues we have today. How do we stop migratory crises, for example? How do we ensure that globalization is undertaken in a fair way so that the proceeds of human endeavor are fairly distributed? If we distribute global profits from global corporations more fairly, in line, for example, with where the resources are coming from, then what's likely to happen is, rather than people trying to move to where the monetary flows are moving to, they will stay where they are because the opportunities where they are as good as if they were to move with the money, if that makes sense. So, we like to have open borders for monetary flows, but we're closing our borders to people flows. And that's contradictory. The reason that people are moving is because of the imbalances that are being created. Now, some of our smartest minds sit in the institutions that are central to the imbalances being created. And what we should really be doing is saying to them, let's find a way to right the imbalances. And in doing that, they're actually doing something that contributes to the social contract and allowing us to find solutions to these big global problems. Financial products were created initially, futures, for example, were created to remove short-term risk. So if you're a farmer, in 6 months' time, you're going to get your harvest, but you want to lock in today what you think you're going to earn in 6 months' time, because that allows you to better plan how you pay your workers, for example, or how you're going to invest in, capital expenditure. So that there's a actual purpose there, and it removes short-termism. It removes the risk of exposure to short-term things that you don't understand. That's what human beings need to plan. And so financial instruments that achieve that are purposeful. But what's happened is that futures have become commodities that people simply trade to make a call on where a price might go. And we used to think that that was necessary as a price clearing, price discovery mechanism. But actually all that's happening is you have people sat there going, if I guess right, I can make some money for myself. And literally the entire industry has ballooned on a ton of activity that's just doing that. So for example, in subprime, you had a product that was created ultimately to allow people lower down in the social ladder, effectively, the socioeconomic ladder, to be able to buy their own homes. But then we figured out that we could leverage that up and become more profitable on the back of it. And we, as a result, made the products, the market too big. So when it imploded, we'd give, in the end, it's useful for someone to have one house, but it's not useful for someone to have 4 houses that they can't afford and don't live in, right? Especially if they don't have a well-paying job. So in that sense, the use of the product becomes abused simply because we're pursuing excess profits, extractive profits. And it's important because it comes to the root of the question, which is, what is purposeful activity? I think that, in a sense, you're right. Things have become too complicated for us to understand. And the only way to resolve that is either to spend more resource understanding it, i.e. recruit more people, teach, educate people to understand it better, etc., or simplify it, right? Both of those require resource. Most importantly, both of those need richer human relationships, right? The only way that you and I can figure out what to do with something that's too complex, whether we need to simplify it or whether we need to get more people to look at it, is to have the kind of relationship where we have a conversation and we say, what are we trying to achieve here? Is this working? Do we understand this? I always get this question, what would you change if you went back, right? And when I started at UBS, the reason I joined the institution, having initially said there's no way I'm working for a bank, the reason I joined is because it felt like it was an institution driven by a group of people who believed in each other, who had a common purpose, who were solving problems together. Right? That's what I was talking about last night when I was talking about my internship and how amazing it was to be able to draw on the expertise and experience of more senior people and people from every section of the bank. What happened at UBS, of course, is that we suffered this massive brain drain because we were having a near-death experience post the subprime crisis. It became a very volatile, conflicted, non-cooperative environment, which became intolerant of failure, and people stopped trusting each other. They stopped working together to find solutions. On top of that, we had this growing complexity in the industrial system itself. So roles were outsourced to Hyderabad in India, for example. So this is a great example where in the olden days, you had an operations guy sat maybe on the desk with you, or at least in the same building. And if there was a problem, they would come to you and they would know you, and there would be a mutual understanding between you of who you are and what's happening with your family and how are you progressing in your career, those kind of things. And so because of that, I would come to you and say, I've seen this problem, I'm trying to fix it, can you help me? But then what happened when you outsource that role to Hyderabad, you now have a difference of culture. You also have a difference of status. So this person who used to be sat next to you who could help you fix a problem is now half a world away in a different time zone with a different culture with a gulf in status. And so now that person really struggles to help you, right? You don't go to him for help because he doesn't really understand it. You've tried to simplify it into processes, which means that he can't really think around the box, especially because, again, the human relationship isn't there to fill in the gaps, to be dynamic. And that's a really small example. But in our case, our heads of trading were in Tokyo and Stanford. Our operational guys were no longer on the same floor. They were on a different floor or in a different building. Our risk managers, we didn't know them. We didn't have a relationship with them. We didn't know if we could trust them. We didn't know if they understood our product properly. So it was really tough to go to them with a problem and say, we need help with this. And it was really tough for them to come to us if they saw something to say, you know, this looks like it's the beginning of something bad. What are we going to do about it? Because we both have a shared and common purpose to ensure that everything works smoothly. Now, companies want to do great things, and so they push people to take risk. I understand that. They need to innovate in order to do great things. What you need is other human beings who say, I get it, you want to do great things, but I don't think that's a good idea. We will get to do great things, but in order to get there, we need to avoid doing crazy things. I mean, yes, to innovate, you need to consider crazy things, but you also need the rational mind that steps in. And I think our work environments have become too complex. The best way to start to fix that is to start moving people, right? So if you've got a group of people who are involved in something, make sure you find a way to help them create a human relationship. You know, if they need to sit with each other, if they just need to spend 3 months in the same office, whatever it is, do it. You then create a relationship between them. The power of that relationship means that they can then work together to solve problems. You also need to tell them to make sure they're doing stuff that's purposeful. They're doing purposeful stuff, they've got relationships with each other, their institution then becomes an institution that's doing something purposeful to its society. So then you start to rebuild this social contract, this idea of trust between institutions and people. Because simply by creating a relationship between two people inside, they start to realize they have a relationship outside the walls of their institution. And so suddenly our institutions become members of society again, and we start to rebuild the contract. What we're seeing today is the reverse of that process: increasing division, increasing conflict, increasing ostracization, immigration processes that are about banning people, kicking people out, immigration processes that are about not sharing. You know, let's make America great again. Well, what made America great was because everyone shared and everyone contributed ideas, and they helped, you know, America as a focus for generating ideas helped us to develop as a global society, and they benefited from that. We're going the other way, and it's the same thing in the UK. You know, I mean, I'm personally facing deportation, and to me that's an example of how we're so unable to realize the importance of allowing people to learn from mistakes and sharing the value of those learnings, that we say, okay, you make one mistake, one strike, you're out, you're gone. And that's a destructive mindset. And that's what needs to change in our institutions. We need to encourage people to find a growth mindset, i.e. that they understand that making mistakes is central to the human condition. That's how we learn, that's how we grow. You're gonna fall down, learn from it, stand back up. And we all do it together, means that we are willing to take on our challenges together, find solutions together, and then we grow together. That's where we need to get to. Well, I mean, it's been an incredible journey. The last 5 years of reflection, the pain, the suffering. I think as human beings, what we do in order to understand our suffering is try and find a purpose from that suffering. And it's only in doing that that, you know, if you think that the purpose was, you know, the suffering came for a reason, then it becomes purposeful and it's not wasted, you know. And I've seen society from like all the way up here with all this responsibility and opportunity, and I've gone through the entire gamut to being cast out completely from my home, right, facing deportation. And in that journey I've met people from the whole social ladder, and you end up picking up lessons from everyone and listening to people and trying to understand what it feels like to be a banker that's hated by society, to being, you know, an immigrant that's hated by society, and all of the good and bad in between that, the love, the hate, all of that. And you kind of come back and you think, you know what, it's just about humanity, it's just about our shared goals. And for me, it feels like my purpose is to bring back the messages I've learned and help to turn that into tools that people can use to rebuild the social contract between our institutions and our societies, and find ways to make the world work more equitably. You know, I think that for me is the biggest lesson of this entire thing, because if we do that, then we have less conflict. And if we share the proceeds of human endeavor more fairly, then more people are given opportunities for growth, and all of us develop together. And the ways in which I can do that are by doing the talks, for example, the one we did last night and the lecture I'm doing this afternoon. I hope to also do a PhD looking at the effect of financialization on societal behavior, so that we can figure out what tools we need to put in place to stop you know, the effects of complexity and financialization and the fraying of our social fabric, and you know, to rebuild that. And I'm involved in a lot of different things, like helping the Forward Institute to teach our future leaders methods of leadership that fit the 21st century, or speaking at the FT 125, or becoming a honorary member of the FT 125, which is a group of executives from our top institutions, and having conversations with them where I'm sharing the lessons, I'm learning from them, bringing those lessons back into universities and work environments, because through the talks and through the PhD. And it's basically just about, in effect, cross-pollinating ideas. It's a weird position to be in. It's remarkable to have gone through this thing, to have learned the things I've already learned, but to be given the opportunities to learn more and to share more, all of that learning. It's really like, it's a phenomenal, how can I put it? It's a real honor to be in my position. And it's really nice to know that I can do something purposeful after all of this, considering that before it happened, before the loss, even when we were still profitable, we'd started to question what was the purpose of what we did. So it is an incredible blessing to have gone through that process and get to the end and think, actually the pain was worth it because I found a sense of purpose and I can contribute something to my global community.